was a temporary article of the Constitution, or the fact that the sort of the misalignment due to the fact that a lot of our national laws did not apply in the Jammu and Kashmir state. So these were all new things to them, because the press normally what it does is it gives you a very black and white picture. On many issues it gives you a picture which corresponds to preconceptions which people have. The press is not without, it likes to shape the narrative in some ways. So I think it was useful to talk about it in a very open manner and give people what was our perspective. I think many cases, people more, I saw people absorbing that, and hopefully they agreed with it.
Thank you, Minister. Just looking at the world in more like a macro perspective, we have gone, to be a bit simplistic, from situation with Cold War to maybe some people would say hot peace. There's a lot of conflicts around the world. We also at the same time have a true multipolar world. At least it's starting to become so. Some people would say we have a G2, but I think there is also many arguments that there are a lot of players now. There is also less momentum around the multilateral processes. WTO is facing real challenges, and as a Wood institution is in this multipolar, multi-conceptual world. India is the largest democracy in the world, 1.2 billion people. Aspiration is 5 trillion economy by 2024, maybe 10 trillion economy by 2030. So India's influence is growing. Will that also lead to India taking, we will see a bigger footprint also from India on foreign and security policy in the region? In the 70s and 80s, India was in many ways the leader of the non-allied world. Today, it is a new reality, and where will India place itself, and what kind of political initiatives will we see from India in this multipolar world?
Okay, there are a lot of questions in there. So let me make a few sharp points as a collective answer. One, no question, the world is more nationalistic than in the past. And a lot of that nationalism is economic nationalism and cultural nationalism. Second, I would say where India is concerned, we in a way are a standout. We are an exception. We are an exception because in this country you could say, yes, we are more nationalistic, but at the same time we don't see a tension between being nationalistic and being international in the sense of dealing more with the world and engaging more with the world. So the nationalism is not a kind of a negative sentiment directed at the world. In fact, people generally feel if you're going up, you should be doing more things with the world, not less things with the world. Third, in a more multipolar, your word, nationalistic, my word, world, I think we will see diplomacy take different forms where the old ways of working will now not go away, but be tempered by much more, I would say, creative, innovative, ad hoc kind of working arrangements, often centering around issues rather than across the board. So the character of international politics will probably change in many ways. Four, I agree with you. I think a lot of multilateral regimes will come under stress. How they survive will depend on how they respond to that. They will come under stress partly because of this nationalism that I spoke about. To some extent, a lot of them are also being critiqued for how well they work or don't work. So there's a kind of performance audit on multilateral regimes also going on. Sometimes that can take very unfair directions, because if you do a performance audit with a very self-centered nationalistic view, then I'm not sure I'd agree with the conclusions of that audit. But certainly that too is a factor. So all in all, I would say a more complicated world, definitely a more interesting one, possibly a more difficult one. But where India is concerned, you also made a reference to G2. That's something we have never accepted. We've never been comfortable with. I think partly what would also distinguish us from other countries is that we still have a very strong relationship with countries of the South, and we, in many negotiations, which we would have seen as trade minister as well, we not only stand for our own interest, to a large extent we voice collective interests of the developing world, G77, for example, certainly when it comes to trade or when it comes to climate change. So I think that's also a constituency for us. Now, when you look at all of this, you could on the one hand say, okay, it's all getting more difficult, probably true. But you could also say that we are in a very unique position, that today, being a market economy, a democracy, socially pluralistic, we have comfort with the West. Being Asian, part of the rise of Asia, we have comfort with a lot of this rebalancing in Asian countries. Having a G77 constituency working with countries of Africa and Asia, we have a much stronger bonding with those countries. So I think we could be at the right intersection. A lot of it, therefore, requires active diplomacy to make sure that those constituencies are all sort of brought together. That's very much the intention of the government. So what you have seen really, definitely over the last 5 years, and you saw recently at the UN, is a willingness today to go out, engage countries, visit more countries, and therefore you can see a new energy in foreign affairs.
No, we have seen your very busy agenda, following you on Twitter. You can be exhausted just by reading your Twitter account. And also your point about Asia, this is the first year, at least since 1850, that Asia is 50% of the global GDP. I think one thing is certain, that India's influence and size in the global economy is just going to increase in the years to come. When will we see Belt and Road kind of initiatives from India's side, or is that not your cup of tea? Will you join the Belt and Road initiative, or will you not? Third question in the same area. Superpowers, traditionally, but also like today, I would say China is the second largest economy, the US is the largest economy, also have this view of that they follow very closely what is happening in their backyard. Of course, there is no Monroe Doctrine anymore, but this notion of Monroe Doctrines is still there. Would India accept whatever happened in your own backyard when it comes to military establishment and etc.? Or that would also be quite interesting too, if you could elaborate on that.
Okay. Let me work backwards on your set of questions.
I'm glad you're starting with the last one.
Look, the world's a competitive place, okay? So all of us might have preferences, but, world doesn't run by entitlements. World runs by capabilities, by influence, by interest. So I would hope very much that we have the ability to influence and compete, which will secure our interests. We are fairly clear what our interests are. You put it very diplomatically. I congratulate you. But the fact is that I will certainly.
I'm looking at the ambassador from Maldives just here in front of me.
So
I wanted to be a bit careful.
We will certainly make sure that our ability to compete, our ability to secure and advance our interests, our ability to influence other countries, which is all, by the way, this is what international relations is about. So I would certainly hope that that remains sharp, that remains effective. And in this exercise, normally, if there is an epicenter, which is yourself, then how good you are is a function of distance. So you start with your immediate neighborhood. If you can't influence your immediate neighborhood, it is very unlikely you'll be able to influence beyond. So to me, that's like the first circle of your interests. Regarding your Belt and Road issue, we have a long-standing position on that. For us, it is connected with sovereignty matters, so that hasn't changed. But the idea of do we do something similar? Look, we are us. We are not some other country, and I think it's not just on this initiative. I think in a whole lot of other areas. My own sense is, as India becomes bigger, the fact is we will find that concepts and analytics which are developed for other countries would not necessarily apply to us. And the expectation that we would copy models which are very different in nature, I don't think that's very likely. Because typically, I mean, we do a lot of things even in our own neighborhood, some of which may surprise you, the scale of which. But it's not, this is in a way, you do these things. I mean, it's done even within India, if you look at it. It's the manner of which it's done is much more disaggregated, it's much more organic. On connectivity, for example, rather than say we have a grand initiative, we would much rather say, okay, we have a development partnership. In fact, that's exactly what my Prime Minister said when he went to Africa last year, where he said, look, we are prepared to do very much more in Africa, but we would like to know what you want. And we'd like to know your priority, and we'd like you to take part in it, and we'd like you to actually own and operate it once we have set it up. So I think that's very much more our manner of doing things. So it may not make that splash, but I think in many ways, I mean, if you go to some countries, for example, you go to Afghanistan, it's not a story which always comes in the headlines, but I would really say with a degree of confidence that probably more Afghans know about what India has done in terms of development than most other countries.
So a softer form of diplomacy
yes.
from the largest democracy.
I would say softer, more collaborative, more co-owned, look in the, I mean, this is us, okay? I mean, other countries can legitimately differ. I would say if you're doing something, I would much rather be that sense of partnership comes out rather than other people think that it's all mine. It's more likely to stay, it's more likely to give me the kind of returns that I really want.
We also know from history that superpowers will be challenged to also try to deal with conflicts in the region. Would we also see India, for example, volunteering to also try to be a mediator in some of the conflicts in the region? Could we, for example, see...
This is a very Norwegian question.
Norway has never been a superpower.
But that has not stopped you mediating.
I used to say when I was foreign minister, the only organization in the world where Norway is a superpower is EFTA. And EFTA is this free trade organization with Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and Iceland. So, and we try to establish a trade deal with India. But on this, for example, we know the situation for Rohingyas between Myanmar and Bangladesh. Could that be something where India could be a mediator? Maybe an even a bigger question that I think we all are concerned about is the situation in the Gulf and with Iran. That has been escalating, has been a little bit more quiet the last week because there are other things in the media, but I don't think the structural challenges related to this is dealt with. Or is it a very Norwegian perspective?
No, look, I mean, if I look back on our history, there are times when we've done some of that. We took a little bit of interest in the Iran-Iraq war in the early stages. We did a not successful mediation in Sri Lanka.
Not as bad as the Norwegians, though, I think.
No, actually ours ended up worse.
Okay.
So, you know, it's not entirely without some past. But I think the Indian way would be very much more that if you have relationships to sort of talk about it, to have conversations, but not declare yourself a mediator and not really kind of create that space and create that profile. I don't think that's really been our style. I don't. I would say personally, I'm not sure for a country like us. I'm not prescribing for everybody else, but I would. It's not something which I see great profit in. But having said that, you know, some of the examples that you raised, say you raised Myanmar, Bangladesh. While it is natural, it is not unconstrained. That somewhere the net result of that is positive. If it gives people more choices, it's actually all for the good. So in that sense, it's a little bit like politics. I mean, we would prefer a multipolar world because it gives you more choices. So if you have a multipolar technological world, that too gives you more choices. But on the issue of where we are, I mean, it's very clear that we have to go down that direction. And if you look, I mean, we are one of those countries where really for every country, its assets are its people. But many countries have other assets too, as you know, in Norway. But we are really completely HR dependent. Our future is completely HR dependent. So a lot of it, to my mind, would be to prepare yourself for a future by improving the quality of your HR and getting your people prepared for a different world. And that can start right down to the basics. I mean, it starts from primary health and literacy and up to, education, to skilling, to digitizing, to employing. I mean, all of that is part of really improving the quality of our HR. And to my mind, that is one area where we had lagged behind. I would certainly see that as really the core priority of this government. I mean, if you look at the totality of all the programs they do, there's a single thread that connects them, and the single thread is really to really improve the quality of human resources of this country.
Well, and it's so. I agree so much. I think this upskilling, reskilling, building the human capital in the country is so crucial. I think on behalf of all the participants, I think we all feel that India is very privileged to have such an insightful foreign minister at the end, because we're not going to clear the ground for the next session. But just to, I think you partly answered it at the end now about building on the human capital, but I think you were the second minister coming from the foreign service, so you have a vast experience on foreign policy and security policy as a former permanent secretary and civil servant and ambassador for many years. If you then look at what kind of footprint you would like to leave in the ministry and India's foreign policy. Well, if you could just in a minute or two share with us that at the end, it would be, we would appreciate it.
Well, look, I've just come in. I mean, you're asking me what would it be when I leave. I think you need to give me a few years to think that through.
Well, I think you have made some reflections.
No, but seriously, look, I would certainly like to see Indian foreign policy have a bigger footprint, to see it much more influential in determining the outcomes of global issues, to obviously see our interests and influence secured in, our immediate periphery and beyond. But at the end of the day, I'm very conscious that we are preparing a foreign policy for a country which, within a decade would be the third largest economy, which would be the most populous country, and which carries a lot of burdens of the past in the sense that, we missed a lot of opportunities in the past, beginning with 1945 when the global order was fashioned. So how do you make up for all the things which you lost out on and yet prepare for all the things that await you? So it will require a lot of thinking through, a lot of imagination, and a lot of energy. And I try to at least prepare a launching pad for it.
Thank you so much.